Chapter 7. Two Strangers. Colin gasped a warning to William Tyndale, hurled himself on the stranger's back, and clawed at the man's large hands. The next instant the deck rose and jarred Colin's shoulder, but he kept tight hold of the man's neck. His opponent did not fight back, and Colin loosened his grip. The man sank to the deck, gasping out a phrase in Latin. With an exclamation of surprise, William Tyndale helped the stranger to his feet. The man stared at Colin in reproachful surprise. "What did you do that for? Couldn't you see that I had lost my balance?" He looked so woebegone that Colin choked back a laugh. No one as loose-jointed and ridiculous-looking as this man could be a threat. The stranger addressed Tyndale. "I was just coming over to ask your advice about something when the ship listed and your boy there threw himself on me." Tyndale raised his eyebrows in a questioning way and looked at Colin. I, I'm sorry," Colin said, gulping. "I thought—" He did not finish. It would sound foolish to say now that he thought the stranger was going to throw William Tyndale overboard. "You see," the man went on, Mr. He waited for the name. With a slight frown of annoyance, Tyndale said coolly, "Hutchins is my name." "Ah, yes, Mr. Hutchins. I saw once that you are a successful merchant. I am a good judge of people, and I said to myself, now look at his man. He is a success, and I am a failure. Perhaps he can advise me how to get hold of some money. I mean, earn it, of course." The stranger leaned on the rail and clasped his large hands. He His glance traveled up and down Tyndale's fine cloak. "Perhaps you could use someone to write letters of business for you." All of Colin's former doubts flooded his mind. Colin hoped Tyndale would brush the man off, but he could see that Tyndale was curious. "I have many qualifications, Mr. Hutchins," the man went on. "I know languages, German, Latin, and Greek." Tyndale's eyes sparkled with interest. Colin squirmed with misgivings. Why would this strange man, name the very languages Tyndale was working with in his translation of the Bible? Yet if he were a spy hired by Cardinal Wolsey, would he grin so foolishly and wave his hands about? The man's babbling eagerness irritated Colin. "I said to myself when I saw you, Mr. Hutchins, that you're a man I'd like to be around. A prosperous gentleman merchant who makes a lot of money and would be willing to share it with poor scholars like me. I'd earn it, of course. You see, I have no money." The stranger pulled out an empty bag and waved it. "I used all I earned in England to pay my fare on the ship." Colin wanted to cry out that he had seen the man at the fire selling fake relics, but he curbed his impulse. Tyndale stared out over the choppy waters of the Channel. "Is there going to be a storm, Sir William?" Colin asked. He could have bitten his tongue for giving away Tyndale's first name and honorary title. "William?" The man gave a little spring and kicked his heels. "My name's William, too. William Roy." Roy grinned a thank you to Colin, leaned forward, and spoke in a confidential tone. "You must have many letters to write, Sir William." Tyndale gazed at Roy, as if sounding him out. Colin had the feeling that Tyndale was praying for guidance. At last Tyndale sighed. He bowed his head in a gesture of helplessness and resigned. "I'd like to know where you received your education," he said. "It seems unusual for a man in your position to know 3 languages. Not unusual in the least, Roy said. You see, I was a monk. A monk! Tyndale jumped back as if he had stepped on a snake. And why, may I ask, aren't you a monk any longer? Roy shuddered and rolled his eyes to the sky. It was the short hair, abominable thing. If it had either hurt or itched, I would have been able to stand it. But it did both. I ran away. Tyndale half smiled. So God sent me a runaway monk to be my helper. Roy's large mouth dropped. It doesn't sound good when you put it that way. How about Martin Luther? He was a monk, and he made his way in the world. Tyndale did not answer. Sir William, Roy whines, the name in a sulky voice. I help scholars prepare manuscripts, and I would do it again, but it doesn't pay enough. That's why I thought I'd attach myself to a prosperous merchant like you. While Colin listened, he was thinking ahead. Maybe Roy would turn them into the church authorities as soon as the ship reached shore. Cardinal Wolsey's agents could be any place. Colin hoped Tyndale would not talk any more, but he saw that Tyndale had just begun. But what if I told you I'm not what you think I am? I'm a runaway, too, and in disguise. Roy stretched his neck in amazement. He seemed unable to turn his gaze from the fur-lined lapels of Tyndale's cloak. But that's a fine garment you're wearing. It's my brother's. Does he have money? Roy asked. He's what you like to call a prosperous merchant. Where is he? In England, Tyndale said. Roy reflected. I don't think I'd better go back to England for a while. After a moment, he asked, Why are you in disguise? Because of the work I'm doing, Tyndale said. It requires the use of Latin, Greek, and German books. A strange, crafty expression, blended of fear and interest, crossed Roy's face. There is only one kind of work that involves 3 languages. Would you be translating something? Colin groaned in dismay. Roy drummed his fingers on the rail. Is this a translation for or against the church? It is for the true church. Roy pondered in silence for a moment. Where is this true church you mentioned? He asked with nervous caution. In the hearts of men who are redeemed. Who are these? No one can say. A man can be judged only by his actions, and these, however good, may not spring from the heart. Only God knows the names of his true churchmen. I don't think much of the Church of Rome, Roy said, with a sly glance. Then you aren't one of Cardinal Wolsey's spies? Colin blurted the question before he thought. The Cardinal's spy? Roy repeated in bewilderment. No, no, I swear it, Sir William, believe me. I am a runaway monk. If the church captures me, I'll be punished. I want to save my skin, and I want to get ahead in the world. A person can't live without money. Try me out, Sir William. Find out what I know. Tyndale addressed Roy in Latin, Greek, and German. To Colin's secret envy, the ex-monk answered fluently in all 3. Tyndale stared over the water for a long time. The waves had quieted, and the ship skimmed the waves at an even keel. Very well, Tyndale said. You may help me. Roy kicked his heels and popped into the air in such a loose-jointed fashion, Colin burst into laughter. Sir William, you will not regret your choice, Roy said. What are you translating? One of the church fathers, no doubt. I'm translating the Bible into English. Roy stepped back. He opened and closed his mouth several times, rolled his eyes, and then seemed to recover himself. Now, just what will my salary be? And would you advance me a little? We'll discuss your salary when we are settled in Hamburg, Tyndale said. Crestfallen, Roy shrugged consent. He appeared alternately glum and elated during the rest of the trip to Germany. Colin watched him swagger about the ship, putting on airs before the other passengers. Roy both amused and irritated Colin. Hamburg was not a bit like London. It was threaded by canals and bordered by gabled warehouses rising sheer from the side of the water. High above the highest building, church spires pointed upward. To Colin, they seemed like warning fingers. Royce nodded toward the church. It's everywhere. You can never get away from it. The church seemed to follow them to the edge of the town, where Tyndale hunted for the address of friends. He knocked at the door of a tall and narrow house, showed a letter of introduction to the maid, and stepped back, waiting. Colin stood in uneasy silence, watching Roy, who paced back and forth. The young man ran to the door. I'm Matthias von Emerson, he said, grasping Tyndale's hand in both of his. Do come in. He ushered the group into a sitting room where his family sat. All listened with eager interest while Tyndale told of his plan to translate the Bible into English. All agreed that it was better to keep such plans secret. The church, the church, they murmured and shook their heads. Are you using the Hebrew scriptures? Matthias von Emerson asked Tyndale. I'm not too strong in that language, Tyndale said. I wish I were. Matthias put both hands on Tyndale's shoulders. Then you must go to Wittenberg and learn Hebrew there. You can talk to Martin Luther, too. Tyndale's eyes gleamed, and his long face lit up with excitement. Colin could see that Tyndale needed only a little encouragement to travel on to Wittenberg. Yes, that's the only thing to do, Matthias continued. Send Roy on ahead. A man and a boy traveling will create less curiosity than two men and a boy. I know enough about your English cardinal to know his agents will try to track you down. When the plans were completed, Tyndale counted out expense money for Roy's trip to Wittenberg. Don't chatter to strangers about your work with me, he warned. Roy looked pained. I know well how to keep out of trouble with the church. Don't forget that I was once a monk, he added in a brighter tone. I'll leave early tomorrow morning. But Roy did not wait. Colin discovered the next day. Sometime in the middle of the night, he skipped out. William Tyndale sighed and shook his head. I shouldn't have given him any money, he told everyone at breakfast. That is his great weakness. But he is an excellent scholar, and with his help, I could have finished the translation by next year. Tyndale did not mention Roy on the way to Wittenberg. Colin, once more on horseback, worried about Roy. Would he betray Tyndale for money? The friendly German people eased his mind. No one asked questions. Everyone seemed happy to lodge the travelers. A few miles from Wittenberg, Tyndale turned the horses to a less traveled road and continued until they came to a small inn. The landlady opened the door. Her face, framed by the stiff linen fold of her wimple, was swollen, and her eyes were red-rimmed. She dabbed at her eyes with the corner of a clean apron and tried to smile. God be with you here, Tyndale said in greeting. The landlady burst into sobs. Tyndale stepped toward her. Can I help you? Oh, sir, it's my daughter. She has the sweating sickness. It's fatal, you know. And she with four small children. The landlady put a trembling hand to her mouth. But do come in and welcome. I see you are a gentleman. If you would like me to, I will pray with your daughter, Tyndale said. In my country, I am an ordained preacher. Oh, would you? Joy and hope transfigured the woman's plain face. Colin's throat tightened in sympathy. Of course, Colin here will watch for travelers. The landlady nodded, smiling. He need only say, I'll be back soon. She motioned Tyndale to the rear of the inn toward a hallway. A little later, Colin found out what Tyndale, as God's instrument, had accomplished. The landlady came in saying over and over, It's a miracle. With my own eyes, I saw the fever pass from her. She ran to stir up the fire. Anything in my house is yours, sir. My inn is small and not on the main road, but I must say travelers return here when they come this way. Now, what will you have for supper? That can wait, Tyndale said. First, we must tend to the horses. Oh, I have a groom who does that, the landlady said. Tyndale was firm. I have some important papers and books packed, and I prefer to handle them myself. At the doorway, he stopped short with an exclamation of surprise. Colin ran up and looked out. The landlady's groom must have spilled the saddlebags. Papers and books lay strewn on the ground. The groom stood wringing his hands. Colin wondered why Tyndale did not run out at once. Then he saw why. A man whom Colin had not seen at first straightened up. He was a tall man, clothed entirely in red, from hose to doublets to red cap. A sword hung at his side. As Colin watched, the man picked up Luther's New Testament, a book Colin recognized even from that distance. The stranger's plump face, with a hint of double chin, looked purposeful. He spoke to the groom, poked among the papers and books for a moment, and then strode toward the inn, still carrying Luther's New Testament. Large and imposing, he held himself so straight that he seemed to bend backward. At each step he stroked his long sword, a sight that sent shudders of terror down Colin's spine.